both large and small, glide between the branches as birds flying among the trees here upon land. In the deepest spot of all stands the castle of the Sea King. Its walls are built of coral, and the long Gothic windows are the clearest amber. The roof is formed of shells, they open and close as the water flows over them. Their appearance is beautiful, for in each lies a glistening pearl which would be fit for a king. The Sea King has been a widower for many years, and there were 6 beautiful children, but the youngest was the prettiest of them all. Her skin was as clear and delicate as a rose leaf, her eyes as blue as the deepest sea, but like all others, she had no feet, and her body ended in a fish tail. Each of the young princesses had a little plot of ground in the garden where she might dig and plant as she pleases. One arranged her flower bed in the form of a whale. Another thought it better to make hers like the figure of a little mermaid. But that of the youngest was round like the sun and contained flowers as red as his rays at sunset. She was a strange child, quiet and thoughtful, while her sisters would be delighted with the wonderful things which they obtained from the wrecks of the vessels. She cared for nothing but her pretty red flowers, like the sun, except a beautiful marble statue. It was the representation of a handsome boy, carved out of pure white stone, which had fallen to the bottom of the sea from a wreck. Nothing gave her so much pleasure as to hear about the world above the sea. She made her father tell her all she knew of the ships and of the towns, of the people and the animals. To her, it seemed the most wonderful and beautiful to hear that the flowers of the land should have fragrance, and not those below the sea, that the trees of the forest should be green, and that the fishes among the trees could sing so sweetly that it was a great pleasure to hear. The grandmother said, "When you have reached your 15th year, you will have permission to rise up out of the sea, to sit on the rocks in the moonlight while the great ships are sailing by, and then you will see both forests and towns." When the sisters rose arm in arm through the water in this way, their youngest sister would stand quite alone, looking after them, ready to cry, only that the mermaids have no tears, and therefore they suffer more. "Oh, were I but 15 years old," she said, "I know that I shall love the world up there, and all the people who live in it." And at last she reached her 15th year. "Well, now you're all grown up," said the Sea King. "Farewell," and rose as lightly as a bubble to the surface of the water. The sun had just set as she raised her head above the waters, but the clouds were tinted with crimson and gold, and through the glimmering twilight beamed the evening star in all its beauty. The sea was calm, and the air mild and fresh. A large ship becalmed on the water. The little mermaid swam close to the cabin windows, and now and then, as the waves lifted her up, she could see in through the clear glass window panes and see a number of well-dressed people within. Among them were a young prince, and the most beautiful of all, with large black eyes. He was 16 years of age, and his birthday was being kept with much rejoicing. And how handsome the young prince looked as he pressed the hands of all present and smiled at them while the music resounded through the clear night air. It was very late, yet the little mermaid could not take her eyes from the ship or from the beautiful prince. Soon the waves rose higher. The heavy clouds darkened the sky, and lightning appeared in the distance. A dreadful storm was approaching. The waves rose mountains high, as if they would be overtopped the mast, but the ship dived like a swan between them, and then rose again on their lofty foaming crests. At length the ship groaned and creaked. The thick planks gave way under the lashing of the sea as it she could not see a single object. But a flash of lightning revealed the whole scene. She could see everyone who had been on board except the prince. When the ship parted, she had seen him sink into the dark waves, and she was glad, for she thought he would be now with her. And then she remembered that human beings could not live in water, so that when he got down to her father's palace, he would be quite dead. But he must not die, so she swam about amongst the beams and planks which strewed the surface of the sea, forgetting that they could crush her to pieces. Then she dived deeply under the dark waters, rising and falling with the waves, till at length she managed to reach the young prince, who was fast losing the power of swimming in that stormy sea. His limbs were failing him. His beautiful eyes were closed, and he would have died had not the Little Mermaid come to his assistance. She held his head above the water and let the waves drift them where they would. In the morning, the storm had ceased, but of the ship not a single fragment could be seen. Presently they came in sight of land. She saw lofty blue mountains on which the white snow rested, as if a flock of swans were lying on them. Near the coast were beautiful green forests, and close by stood a large building. Whether a church or a convent she could not tell. She swam with the handsome prince to the beach, which was covered with fine white sand, and there she lathed him in the warm sunshine, taking care to raise his head higher than his body. Then bells sounded in the large white building, and the number of young girls came into the garden. The Little Mermaid swam out farther from the shore and placed herself between some high rocks that rose out of the water. Then she covered her head and neck with the foam of the sea, so that her little face might not be seen, and watched to see what would become of the poor prince. She did not wait long before she saw a young girl approach the spot where he lay. She seemed frightened at first, but only for a moment. Then she fetched a number of people, and the mermaid saw that the prince came back to life again, and smiled upon those who stood round him. But to her he sent no smile. He knew not that she had saved him. This made her very unhappy. And when he was led away into the great building, she dived down sorrowfully into the water and returned to her father's castle. "Come, little sister," said the other princesses. Then they entwined their arms and rose up in a long row to the surface of the water, close by the spot where they knew the prince's palace stood. Now that she knew where he lived, she spent many an evening and many a night on the water near the palace. And she remembered that the prince had rested on her bosom, and how heartily she had kissed him, but he knew nothing of this, and wished more and more to be able to wander about with those whose world seemed to be so much larger than her own. "If human beings are not drowned," asked the Little Mermaid to her grandmother, "can they live forever? Do they never die as we do here at the sea?" "Yes," replied the old lady, "they must also die, and their term of life is even shorter than ours. We sometimes live to 300 years, but when we cease to exist here, we only become foam on the surface of the water. We have not even a grave down here of those we love. We are not immortal souls. We shall never live again, but like the green seaweed, when once has been cut off, we can never flourish more. Human beings, on the contrary, have souls which live forever, lives after the body has turned to dust. It rises up to the clear, pure air, beyond the glittering stars. As we rise out of the water and behold all the land of earth, so do they rise to unknown and glorious regions which we shall never see. Why have not we an immortal soul?" asked the Little Mermaid mournfully. "I would give gladly all the hundreds of years that I have to live to become a human being only for one day, and to have the happiness of mankind. He would give a soul to you and retain his own as well. But this can never happen. Your fish's tail, which amongst us is considered so beautiful, is thought on earth to be quite ugly. They do not know any better, and they think it necessary to have two stout props, which they call legs, in order to be handsome. The little mermaid sighed and looked sorrowfully at her fish's tail. Then she heard the bugle sounding through the water and thought, he is certainly sailing above us, he on whom my wishes depend, and in whose hands I should like to place the happiness of my life. I will venture all for him, and to win an immortal soul while my sisters are dancing in my father's palace, I will go to the sea witch, and of whom I have always been so much afraid, but she can give me counsel and help. Through the midst of the crushing whirlpools, the little mermaid was obliged to pass. She reached the dominions of the sea witch. The little mermaid was so alarmed at what she saw that she stood still, and her heart beat with fear, and she was very nearly turning back, but the thought of the prince and of the human soul for which she longed, her courage returned. And there sat the sea witch, allowing a toad to eat from her mouth, just as people sometimes feed a canary with a sugar cube. She called the ugly water snakes her little chickens and allowed them to crawl all over her bosom. I know what you want, said the sea witch. It's very stupid of you, but you shall have your way, and it will bring you sorrow. You want to get rid of your fish's tail and have two supports instead of it, like human beings on earth, so that the young prince may fall in love with you, and that you may have an immortal soul. And then the witch laughed so loud and disgustedly that the toads and snakes fell to the ground, and there they wriggled about. You are but just in time, said the witch, for after sunrise tomorrow I shall not be able to help you till the end of another year. I will prepare a draught for you, for which you must swim to land tomorrow before sunrise and sit down on the shore and drink it. Your tail will disappear and shrink into what mankind calls legs, and you will feel great pain as if a sword were passing through you. But all who shall see you will say that you are the prettiest little human being they ever saw. You will still have the same floating gracefulness of movement, and no dancer will ever tread so lightly. But at every step you take, it will be as if you are treading on sharp knives, and that the blood must flow. If you will bear all this, I will help you. Yes, I will, said the little princess in a trembling voice, as she thought of the prince and the immortal soul. But think again, said the witch, for once your shape has become that of a human, you can no more be a mermaid. You will never return through the waters to your sisters or to your father's palace again, and you will not win. And if you do not win the love of the prince, so that he is willing to forget his father and mother for your sake, and to love you with his whole soul, then you will never have an immortal soul. The first morning after he marries another, your heart will break, and you will become foam on the crest of the waters. I will do it, said the little mermaid, as she became pale as death. But I must be paid also, said the witch. It is not a trifle that I ask. You have the sweetest voice of any who dwell here in the depths of the sea, and you believe that you will be able to charm the prince with this also. But this voice you must give to me. The best thing you possess will I have for the price of this draught. My own blood must be mixed with it, that it may be sharp as a two-edged sword. But if you take away my voice, what is there dropped. When at last the magic drug was ready, it looked like the clearest water. "There it is for you," said the witch. Then she cut off the mermaid's tongue so that she became dumb and would never speak or sing or talk again. The sun had not risen when she had come into the sight of the prince's palace and approached the beautiful marble steps where the moon shone clear and bright. The little mermaid drank the magic drop, and it seemed as if a two-edged sword went through her delicate body. She fell into a swoon and lay like one dead. When the sun arose and shone over the sea, she recovered and felt a sharp pain. But just before her stood the handsome prince. He fixed his cold black eyes upon her so earnestly that she cast down her own, and then became aware that her fish's tail was gone, and that she had a pretty pair of white legs and tiny feet as any little maiden could have. But she had no clothes, so she wrapped herself in her long, thick hair. The prince asked who she was and where she came from, and she looked at him loudly and sorrowfully with the deep blue eyes, but she could not speak. Every step she took was as the witch had said it would be. She felt as if the treading upon the points of needles or sharp knives. But she bore it willingly and stepped as lightly by the prince's side as a soap bubble, so that he and all who saw her wondered at her graceful swaying movements. She was very soon arrayed in costly robes of silk and muslin, and was the most beautiful creature in the palace. But she was dumb and could never speak nor sing. The prince said that she should remain with him always, and she received permission to sleep at his door on a velvet cushion. He had a page's dress made for her, that she might accompany him on horseback. She climbed with the prince to the top of high mountains, and although her tender feet bled so that even her steps were marked, she only laughed and followed him until they could see the clouds beneath them, looking like a flock of birds traveling to distant lands. While at the prince's palace, and when all the household were asleep, she would go and sit on the broad marble steps, for it eased her burning feet to bathe them in the cold sea water. And then she thought of all those below in the deep. As the days passed, she loved the prince more fondly, and he loved her as he would a little child. But it never came into his head to make her his wife. Yet, unless he married her, she could not receive an immortal soul, and on the morning after his marriage with another, she would dissolve into the foam of the sea. "Do you not love me the best of them all?" the eyes of the little mermaid seemed to say, when he took her into his arms and kissed her fair forehead. "Yes, you are dear to me," said the prince, "for you have the best heart, and you are the most devoted to me. You are like a young maiden whom I once saw, but whom I shall never meet again. I was in a ship that was wrecked, and the waves cast me ashore near a holy temple where several young maidens performed the service. The youngest of them found me on the shore and saved my life. I saw her but twice, and she is the only one in the world whom I could love. But you are like her, and you are almost driven her image out of my mind. She belongs to the holy temple, and my good fortune has sent you to me instead of her, and we will never part." "Ah, he knows not that it was I who saved his life," thought the little mermaid. "I carried him over the sea to the wood where the temple stands. I sat beneath the foam and watched till the human beings came to help him. I saw the pretty maidens that he loves better than he loves me." And the mermaid sighed deeply, but she could not shed tears. "He says the maiden belongs to the holy temple, therefore she will never return to the world. They will meet no more while I am by his side and see him every day. I will take care of him and love him and give up my life for his sake." Very soon it was said that the prince should marry her, and that the beautiful daughter of a neighboring king would be his wife. where a fine ship was fitted out. Although the prince gave out that he merely intended to pay a visit to the king, it was generally supposed that he really went to see his daughter. A great company were to go with him. The Little Mermaid smiled and shook her head. She knew the prince's thoughts better than any of the others. I must travel, he said to her. I must see this beautiful princess. My parents desire it, but they will not oblige me to bring her home as my bride. I do not love her. She is not the beautiful maiden in the temple whom you resemble. If I were forced to choose a bride, I would rather choose you, my dumb foundling, with those expressive eyes. And then he kissed her rosy cheeks, and then he kissed her rosy mouth, played with her long waving hair, and laid his head on her heart while she dreamed of human happiness and an immortal soul. You are not afraid of the sea, my dumb child, said he. And they stood on the deck of a noble ship which was to carry them to the country of the neighboring king. And then he told her of a storm and of a calm, of strange fishes in the deep beneath them, and what the divers had seen there. And she smiled at his descriptions, for she knew better than anyone what wonders were at the bottom of the sea. The next morning, the ship sailed into the harbor of a beautiful town belonging to the king, whom the prince was going to visit. But the princess had not yet appeared. People said she was being brought up and educated in a religious house, where she was learning every royal virtue. At last she came. Then the Little Mermaid, who was very anxious to see whether she was really beautiful, was obliged to acknowledge that she had never seen a more perfect vision of beauty. Her skin was delicately fair, and beneath her long, dark eyelashes, her laughing blue eyes shone with truth and purity. It was you, said the prince, who saved my life when I lay dead on the beach. And he folded his blushing bride in his arms. Oh, I am too happy, said he to the Little Mermaid. My fondest hopes are all fulfilled. You will rejoice at my happiness, for your devotion to me is great and sincere. The Little Mermaid kissed his hair and felt as if her whole heart were already broken. His wedding morning would bring death to her, and she would change into the foam of the sea. The Little Mermaid, dressed in silk and gold, held up to the bride's train, but her ears heard nothing of the festival music, and her eyes saw naught of the holy ceremony. She thought of the night of death, which was coming for her, and of all she had lost in the world. Her tender feet felt as if they were cut with sharp knives, but she cared not for it. A sharper pain had pierced through her heart. She knew that this was the last evening she should ever see the prince, for whom she had forsaken her kindred and her home. She had given up her beautiful voice and suffered unheard of pain daily for him, while he knew nothing of it. This was the last evening that she would breathe the same air with him, or gaze on the starry sky and the deep sea. An eternal night without a thought or dream awaited her. She had no soul, and now she could never win one. All was joy and gaiety on board the ship, till long after midnight she laughed and danced with the rest, while the thoughts of death were in her heart. The prince kissed his beautiful bride, while she played with his raven hair, till they went arm in arm to rest in the splendid tent. Then all became still on the ship. The helmsman, alone awake, stood at the helm. The Little Mermaid leaned her white arms to the edge of the vessel. She looked towards the east for the first blush of the morning, for the first ray of dawn that would bring her death. She saw her sisters rising out of the flood. They were pale as herself, but their long, beautiful hair waved no more in the wind. It had been cut off. We have given our hair to the witch, to obtain help for you, that you may not die tonight. She has given us a knife. Here it is. See, it is very sharp. Before the sun rises, you must plunge it into the heart of the prince. When the warm blood falls on your feet, they will grow together and form into a fish's tail, and you will be once more a mermaid and return to us to live after 300 years before you die and change the seas. Haste then, he or you must die before sunrise. Our old grandmother moans for you so that her white hair has fallen off from sorrow, as ours fell under the witch's scissors. Kill the prince and come back. Hasten. Do you not see the first red streaks in the sky? In a few minutes the sun will rise and you must die. And then they sighed deeply and mournfully and sank down beneath the waves. The little mermaid drew back the crimson curtain of the tent and beheld the fair bride with her head resting on the prince's breast. She bent down and kissed his fair brow, and then looked at the sky in which a rosy dawn grew brighter and brighter. She glanced at the sharp knife, and again her fixed eyes on the prince, who whispered the name of his bride in the dreams he was having. She was in his thoughts, and the knife trembled in the hand of the little mermaid. Then she flung it far away from her into the waves. The water turned red where it fell, and the drops that spurted up looked like blood. She cast one more lingering, half-fainting glance at the prince, and then threw herself from the ship into the sea and thought her body was dissolving in the foam. But she continued to rise higher and higher out of the foam. Where am I? She asked. Her voice sounded ethereal, as the voice of those who were with her. No earthly music could imitate it. Among the daughters of the air, answered one of them. A mermaid has not an immortal soul, nor she can obtain one unless she wins the love of a human being. On the power of another hangs her eternal destiny. But the daughters of the air, although they do not possess an immortal soul, can, by their good deeds, procure one for themselves. We fly to warm countries and cool the sultry air that destroys mankind with a pestilence. We carry the perfume of the flowers to spread the health and restoration. After we have striven for 300 years for all the good in our power, we receive an immortal soul and take part of the happiness of mankind. You, poor little mermaid, have tried with your whole heart to do as we are doing. You have suffered and endured and raised yourself to the spirit world by your good deeds. And now, by striving for 300 years in the same way, you may obtain an immortal soul. The little mermaid lifted her glorious eyes toward the sun and felt them for the first time filling with tears. On the ship in which she had left the prince, there were life and noise, and she saw him and his beautiful bride searching for her. Sorrowfully they gazed at the pearly foam, as if they knew she had thrown herself into the waves. Unseen, she kissed the forehead of her bride and fanned the prince, and then mounted with the other children of the air to a rosy cloud as they floated through the ether. After 300 years, thus shall we float in the kingdom of heaven, said she, and we may even get there sooner, whispered one of her companions. Unseen, we can enter the houses of men where there are children, and for every day on which we find a good child who is the joy of his parents and deserve their love, our time of prohibition is shortened. The child does not know when we fly through the room that we smile with joy at his good conduct. For we can count 1 year less of our 300 years. But when we see a naughty or a wicked child, we shed tears of sorrow. For every tear a day is added to our time of trial. thus concludes the tale of the Little Mermaid.